Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome back to another movie talk with two scoops. Today we're going to be talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender, more specifically season 1, book 1. This is just the first part of a 3-part series that I'm going to be doing, reviewing the whole series. So I'm just going to tell you about the first season. I'm going to try to stay away from spoilers, although most people have probably seen it already, and if you haven't, I mean, it's like 10 years old, so what do you expect? If you ask anybody about Avatar: The Last Airbender, they're probably gonna say, just make it through the first season. By the time you get to season 2, that's when things really pick up. And that's true, but I feel like that also discredits this season because this season spends a lot of time setting up a lot of arcs that are ultimately gonna pay off by the time you get to season 2 and season 3. But what I really liked about this season is that it deliberately took time to develop the 3 main characters, although there'll be more main characters to come along. But Aang, Sokka, and Katara, it takes the time to really develop them and develop their friendship, and it just gives you time to get to know these characters and to care about them, so that when the later seasons come and we find ourselves in these interesting situations, it makes it that much better because these characters, you've grown to care about these characters, and you honestly care what happens to them. And by the time you get to the 3rd season, you're gonna love this first season, because that's how I feel. I don't really remember the first time that I watched it, because I think I was 8 when it came out. I know I liked it from the start, but what I can say is that after watching it again, and I think I probably just finished it for like the 4th time, I believe, but after watching it the 2nd time all the way through, by the time I got to the 3rd season, I realized just how much I liked the 1st season, because so many of the things that I liked about the 2nd season and the 3rd season were results of things that they put in motion in the 1st season. So all of that to say, you might hear people say, as soon as you get to the 2nd season, that's when it picks up. And I don't want to discredit that, but I also want to not discredit this 1st season, because all of the things that you're going to love about this show, 9 times out of 10 starts with this 1st season. So I want to highlight a couple of the episodes, because one thing that separates this season from the following seasons is that it is a more episode by episode feel to it. And what I mean by that is that there is an overarching theme of this season, but for the most part, each episode is, a new conflict. So at the start of the episode, you have a rising conflict, and by the end of the episode, it's resolved. And season 2 and season 3 kind of have more of a consistent issue that they're trying to solve, or problem that they're trying to resolve. Instead of an ordinary review where I kind of just talk about it, I thought I'd go through the episodes and tell you what I enjoyed about it. And, so we'll take it that way. So the first episode, episode 1, The Boy in the Iceberg, I feel like this episode was very, very good. It was instrumental to the series as a whole, because it set up the arcs of many of the main characters in the show. For example, the very first line is from Sokka, and he's saying, "You're not going to get away from me this time. Watch this, Katara. This is how you catch a fish," or something like that. Basically, he and Katara are out in the middle of the ocean, and they're trying to fish. They're trying to get food. And he is very focused on trying to get this fish. And what I think is so interesting about this line is that immediately Sokka's character. He's determined, he's very driven, and he's cocky. But then it's followed by him not actually getting a fish. It shows that he's driven, he just lacks discipline, and he lacks, technique. Katara, on the other hand, she is able to get a fish through waterbending, but she can't hold on to it. And what we learn from her, from just seeing that, is that she's powerful, she's capable of doing these things, but she needs more practice. And then it's followed by, Sokka talking about Katara and how her waterbending is silly, and, if he had those powers that he would hide them. But basically what we get from that is that Sokka wishes that he had those powers, and he's a little insecure about the fact that he can't bend. But anyway, fast forward some, and Katara and Sokka find Aang in the iceberg, and as soon as they find him, they bust the iceberg open, and this beam of light shoots up, and then Zuko sees it, and immediately we know everything we need to know about his character. He's very driven, because the minute he sees the light, he's like, "This is the Avatar. we got to go get him. So you can tell that he's determined to find Avatar, and the fact that he was even sailing at that particular moment just shows how relentless this dude is. And then we meet Uncle Iroh, and we know everything that we need to know about his character from his first line, which is, well, I don't remember what the first line is, but it was something about, you know, Zuko, don't get worked up. What do you say? He said something about some tea. So we know right from the get-go that this dude is like, he's with his nephew because he cares about him, but at the end of the day, he's not very interested in finding an Avatar. He's just there, you know, because he was banished too with Zuko. So immediately, that's what I like about this episode. And then we go back to Sokka and Katara and now Aang, and the dynamic of those three kind of starts to develop. And what I like about this episode is it kind of sets the bar for what's to come this season and throughout the rest of the show. And I'm not going to do every episode. I'm going to do the episodes that I think are the most impactful in this season. So moving on. The Southern Air Temple episode, that's episode 3. Now, I like this episode because this is the first time that Aang goes back to the Southern Air Temple. If you don't know, that's where Aang grew up with all the other monks, and that's where he had his friends in his life before he ran away and all of that stuff. But what I liked about this episode is that you find out just how deep and dark this series can get, because it is a cartoon after all on Nickelodeon, targeted to children, but it deals with themes like, you know, genocide and war and all of these, you know, things that you wouldn't necessarily expect out of a children's cartoon. And it doesn't really shy away from it either. In fact, it's kind of in your face. So what happens in this episode is Aang takes Sokka and Katara to the Southern Air Temple. And while there, Aang comes across corpses of many of his friends and, you know, teachers. And most importantly, Monkey Atso, who was one of his best friends, his favorite monk. So of course Aang is very emotional, and he ends up going into the Avatar state. And this is the first time that we see the Avatar state as well. Actually, no, cut that. First episode, we see the Avatar state for the first time. Going back. Anyway, very powerful stuff. You see how deep this show can get. You see how emotional this show can get. And this is only the 3rd episode. Moving on. Winter Solstice Part 1, the Spirit World. This is the first time that Aang enters the Spirit World. This is the first time that he has any type of communication with Avatar Roku, which is pretty cool. It kind of gives you a glimpse into what the Spirit World is going to be. I don't remember, the first season doesn't really dive deep into the Spirit World too much, but you get a good taste of it in this episode. And this is the first time that Aang gets some type of information regarding his past lives and some type of spiritual guidance as far as being an Avatar, because he was so young when he got frozen in an iceberg that he never really learned anything about being the Avatar. In fact, he had just found out that he was the Avatar, I want to say a day or two before this episode. Excuse me for one moment. Okay, I'm back. Moving on. Winter Solstice Part 2, Avatar Roku. So this is the first time that Aang actually talks to Avatar Roku. This is the second part of, well, clearly it's the Winter Solstice Part 2. But what I like about this episode is that it shows us just how smart Sokka could be. This is the first episode where we see Sokka kind of hatch an idea, a plan, and it isn't successful, but it shows us that this dude has potential to be a good leader if only he, you know, practices more and he gets more help, and he's willing to take help from his friends and his, you know, his peers. Oh, what's up, ma'am? Did you get off an hour ago?
So did.
Oh my goodness. Moving on. Episode 10, titled Jet. It also highlights the intelligence that Sokka has. There's this one scene where he uses a knife and he sticks it into a tree and he puts his ear up to it, and Jet is like, what are you doing? He's like, it enhances the vibrations so you can sense people coming in the woods. But basically, this episode shows us the potential that Sokka has as a leader, but it shows us that he's easily manipulated and that he has a lot of growing to do. The Great Divide, we won't get into that episode, because it's kind of a filler. I know everybody was tired of it because it was the only episode that didn't have a lot to do with the overarching narrative of the first season. So it kind of just is smack dab in the middle, and I mean, it's an enjoyable episode, but there's really no serious context to it, any consequential actions that take place in this episode. The Storm. All right, now this is episode 12, and what I like most about that episode is that it gives you history. It gives you the history of Aang, but at the same time, it gives you the history of Zuko, who, if you've seen the show, you know he has one of the best arcs in television history, in my opinion, and a lot of people agree. But anyway, it shows us their history, and actually you get to see how similar their past is. And it's so hard to get into it without talking about the other seasons, but I want to save that. But basically, Aang and Zuko have this shared history that gets deeper and deeper as you get through the show. But what this episode does is shows us the parallel between the two of them and how they got to be to where they are in the present. And you get to see it for the first time. You see what happened, how Aang finds out that he's the Avatar. You see how Zuko gets banished. And the whole episode is a back and forth between Aang and Zuko. And it sets up a huge plot point that's going to develop throughout the rest of the series. So don't sleep on this episode. Moving forward. The Fortune Teller, another great episode, episode 14. What I enjoy about this episode is that you finally get to see just how powerful Aang can be when he basically stops lava from destroying this town all by itself, basically. And it's interesting because I know I said I wouldn't jump into other seasons, but when you find out how Avatar Roku died, you see just how important this episode is and what Aang does and how it kind of ties into his past life. The Northern Air Temple, episode 17, I think is a very interesting episode because now Aang and the gang go to the Northern Air Temple, and shortly after arriving there, they find out that people actually are living there, but they aren't airbenders. And what I like about this episode is that it's the first time that Aang comes to some type of term with the idea of all of his friends and family being gone, and the understanding that life goes on and that change isn't necessarily bad. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the gist of that episode. Change, I guess. Aang coming to accept the fact that things are different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that things are bad now. The Waterbending Master, episode 18. Now, this is when things start to pick up. If you make it this far into the first season, you're going to be hooked. The gang arrives at the Northern Water Tribe, and this is when Aang finally meets his Waterbending Master. He and Katara finally meet a Waterbending Master. And what I like about this episode is that at first, the Waterbender Master is reluctant to teach Katara because in the Northern Water Tribe, they don't teach women waterbending. They are taught to use their waterbending for healing purposes. So not too long after getting there, they kind of change the way they do things. That by the end of this episode, or by the end of this 3-part finale, he decides to start teaching women to waterbend. So Katara gets pretty good at it, and now she's able to help Aang learn waterbending. So I thought that was pretty cool. All right, so the next 2 episodes are just a part of this 3-part series finale, and it is amazing. The Fire Nation tried to take over the Northern Water Tribe, and they almost do, but of course Aang goes into the Avatar stage after a whole bunch of craziness and saves the day. But what I like so much about this 3-part finale is that once again it shows us just how powerful Aang can be once he masters all 4 elements, and once he finally comes into his full, Avatar state, I guess, for lack of better words. But anyway, that's the end of the first season. So overall, like I said before, I love this season because it sets so many pieces into play that will pay off in the seasons to come. And so if you get through this season, you will love the rest of this show. I promise you. So thanks for tuning in. If you like this video, please hit that like button, share, subscribe, all of that. This channel is about to blow up. You want to be a part of that. See you next time.